This video is going to show you solo GM with Finality's Auger, the dungeon exotic from Sundry Doctrine, and how it now performs in in-game content as it's been buffed and reworked. Before I get into that, I just want to mention I'm going to be whispering for this starting section just to save my voice, and it also sort of makes me sound like a peeping Tom. Bit from the dark side, watch your whole family eat dinner. I have a real dark vision. So, the Grandmaster is Sunless, so let's get the basics out of the way. Surges are Void Surge, Strand Surge, Avoid Threat. Champions are only unstoppable. A couple of other GM mods are not even worth mentioning. So, Finality's Auger is now more than useful in in-game content now. In actual fact, it's fantastic. The amount of damage you can put out, and it's very good for GMs, right? You do insane, incredible amounts of damage now with this weapon. Before the update, it was a rubbish weapon, and I told you all that. It's no longer the case. This weapon is fantastic. Consider this weapon like Anarchy, but as a linear fusion rifle. That's exactly what it is. You don't want to use this weapon as a linear. You want to use it as a turret weapon. Basically, that's the best way to get the most out of this weapon. So the Rune Scribe's Forge is basically just alt fire. You then are able to make a turret, and then you want to paint that target, right? When you paint them, you get more damage. It's also got bait and switch. The turret can take advantage of bait and switch, so bear that in mind when you're doing damage with this turret. So you're going to exclusively use it for the turret. There might be odd occasions you use it to the linear mode, but mainly the turret. Other weapons, I'm using Rake Angle because it's a fantastic weapon in Sunless Cell. Voutsef, a fantastic weapon in this. It's incredible. Void weapons are in the game right now, as I've been saying for a long time. It's synergized with my build by using a Void Primary as well. His artifact mods, what's important? Right, Unstoppable Fusion is important. I think that means your turret stuns the unstops. I believe so. Unstoppable Glaive, that's dual wielded. I've got Overclock and Load on. Volatile Marksman because of the Void Primary. Hold the Line's pretty nice. Dielectric. Maligned Harvest is massive. Make sure you're running that on any Warlock builds at all, especially when it has Transcendence in it and Void stuff. Right? Flashover. Go from Lead is very good for this because the ammo economy of Finality's Auger is good. It's maybe 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10 now. But I just put this on in the chance of getting more heavy, and it did proc a couple of times. Particle Reconstruction does work on the turret, I believe, and I've got Defib Blast on. That means you're sacrificing Limit Break, but it's worth it for the particle. So you've had that information. Now it's the build, right? This works perfect with my customized build that I've been going on about for the last 9 months. The custom role. Spirit of Starfire, Spirit of Filaments, right? I've given lots of introductions to this build in the past. Maybe watch some of my other videos of more of an in-depth breakdown. I can't give you an in-depth breakdown of it today because I want to save my voice. But just note that you're going to do an incredible amount of damage on this setup. Basically, you're going to have 3 turrets up. Bleak Watcher, Helion, and Finality's Auger turret. And you're going to have Radiant. And you're going to have Empower and Rift. So the build, Song of Flame, definitely. Power and Rift, that needs to go on. Arcane Needle. Doesn't matter on the nade because you can put a healing nade just in case you emergency need to use it if you die, but we're using Bleak Watcher to consume the nade. Helion is incredibly strong in the game, so we're using that. Fragments are dead important. Facet of Ruin, Facet of Courage, Facet of Dawn, Facet of Awakening, Facet of Dominance, Facet of Hope. This is a build crafter's build dream. If there was any build crafters build in this game, this is it, because it's very strict on stats. I recommend at least tier 10 resilience, a tier 9 recovery at least, maybe 8. You could get away with 8, but try and aim for 9 minimum, and discipline at least 9 minimum. So if you add a 10, 9, 9, that's good enough. But if you can get the 100 stats, my god, it just excels the build that little bit. Yeah, but the fragments will foolproof you, like I say. Tier 10, 9, 9, because the idea is you need to get rifts, you need to keep doing nades. Spirit of Starfire will work with everything in your kit, including Song of Flame while standing in Power and Rift. And it works with Transcendence gameplay. You're going to get more turrets during neutral gameplay, as in stasis turrets. And every time you pop an Empowering Rift, you're going to get a Helion to back it up, not to mention a higher up time of damage across the entire GM because you keep Empowering Rifting. That will give you Devour for protection because you've got it with filaments. This build is incredibly good, so I highly recommend that you try it out, especially with Finality's Auger. I'm very shocked on how good it is today. I went to test it today thinking, you know, it's going to be rubbish, but I'll post the video anyways once I'm done it. No way. As soon as I load it in, I'm melting. I'm solo one cycle and champs. Yeah. So the rework has really put this weapon where it should have been at launch. But that's alright. We can forgive Bungie for that, because it's only been a few months since that dungeon came out, and it's now in a good spot. I don't know how it performs as a solo DPS for dungeons, but in terms of it's a GM weapon. Like New Land Beyond I said it was a GM weapon. Finality's Auger is in the same light of that, as it being very favourable for hard combatant sections, and you find that in this game in GMs, not so much as dungeons as much. Depends on what it is exactly. If it's contest dungeons, alright, well that's different, but normal dungeons you don't get the same combat feel like you do in GMs. So that's why I'm obviously showing you it in GMs. So that was literally the setup. Here's the armor mods. There'll be a dim link. I'm not going through all of it. I'm not going to do a comment on the full run to save my voice, but like I say, I want to give you intro for context of what I'm doing, and then you'll see the run. I encourage you to watch how much damage it's doing to champs, how much damage it's doing the boss. I flew through this GM with this. It was very good. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you.